What's up guys, Jay here and welcome back to another DeepRockGalactic video. In this video, we're going to expand on a topic that we have already covered in a previous video. Ever since I made my first guides covering the classes at a base level, I've had a lot of requests to do more in-depth guides on specific upgrades and proper builds for each of them. Now the reason I have been so hesitant to start them is because, as you guys can probably tell at this point, and from what I have read, I'm not exactly super savvy in terms of build crafting in this game. That being said, I do want to try my best to improve both myself and anyone else who is trying to make that journey to Legendary as smooth and enjoyable as possible. Don't worry, we'll get back to the mission guides soon, but since people wanted to see some advanced guides, I figured I might as well start with the Engineer class, since, for some reason, it's my most watched video as of the making of this video. So after much testing, research, and a lot of adjustments, let's take a deeper dive into the intricacies and finer details of the Engineer class and how you can set yourself up for success on the road to Legendary. By the way, if you want to see more gaming videos, subscribe to the channel, that way it's easier to find my content.
Turrets and explosions! You've come to the right place, mate!
So you want to expand and improve your playstyle with the Engineer class in DeepRockGalactic. Well, the first thing you want to do is understand the fundamentals of the class. Thankfully, we've already covered the basics of playing the Engineer in the Engineer Beginner's Guide. Make sure to watch that video if you have not yet, because from this point on, I'm going to assume that you understand and know the basics of what the class does and the equipment he has access to. That being said, in this video, we are going to be expanding on those ideas and try to get the most out of what the Engineer can offer. As I said before, the Engineer plays a very defensive and supporting role to the team. Now this goes beyond just being able to protect an area with firepower. The Engineer has a strong ability to manipulate the flow of combat and funnel the enemies into easy to control choke points. Using his array of equipment like the sentries, lures, mines, and even the platform gun, he's able to redirect the enemy forces into whatever direction he can cover the most. Combine this with his wide array of weaponry, and the Engineer is capable of warping the layout of the battle and allowing his allies to be as efficient as possible.
Identify targets and exterminate. That's how it's done.
If you want to get the most out of the Engineer, you need to know just what kind of potential he has, as well as how you can outfit him to be as effective as possible. To do this, let's go over how you can set up your Engineer for success and become a nightmare for the bugs. First, let's talk about what kind of perks you might want to give the Engineer. Again, I'm going off of the notion that you know and understand the basics of perks, but if you don't, I've made a video covering them as well, so check that out if you have not yet. That said, for the Engineer, there are several options you could take to use for perks. In terms of passive perks, Born Ready is a great first option for really any class, but especially here since the Engineer is constantly switching from one weapon to the other in quick succession. Secondly, I would take Thorns for added survivability since you don't have any real way to escape the bugs. The last spot really depends on the situation, but perks like Resupplier, Second Wind, or Elemental Installation could all be good choices. In terms of active perks, again, there are a few options you can take. Beastmaster is a good choice and personal favorite of mine because it just gives you more bodies to use to control the bugs. Outside of that, Field Medic, Heightened Senses, and Dash are all great options you could use. Now you don't need to stick to these setups exactly, and feel free to experiment to see what works for you, but this has worked well in my experience as a good starting point. Now that the initial setup is done, it's time to get into the real meat and potatoes of build crafting, the weapon setup. In the last Engineer video, we covered the basic loadout the Engineer has in terms of weapons and what they are roughly capable of. Now we're going to dive deep and talk about the full list of potential upgrades and loadouts that these weapons have and which one is most likely best for you. Note that similar to the beginner classes, I won't be going too deep into overclocks simply because I don't have all of them. However, I will mention certain overclocks that are effective on certain weapons that I do have or have learned about through my research. The Warthog shotgun, as I said before, is a very simple but elegant weapon. It's sturdy, compact, and powerful, and has access to some very useful combinations of upgrades. In the first tier, you have the choice of either increased rate of fire or a larger magazine size. Here, you can really choose either one, but I personally go for more ammo. In Tier 2, you have a choice for more overall ammo reserves, more pellets in each shot, which basically means you do more damage, or a tighter spread for more accuracy. Again, this choice isn't too consequential, but personally I just like either having more ammo or more damage. In Tier 3, you have either reduced recoil, faster reload time, or further increased magazine size. Here, I personally take the bigger mag size because, at least in my opinion, both the recoil and reload times are not bad enough on this weapon to warrant upgrading them. In the fourth tier, you can have either increased damage or increased armor breaking capabilities. Here, it kinda depends on what you're doing. You could really choose either one of these and be fine, but if I had to pick one, I would go with just more raw damage. Finally, in Tier 5, we have the biggest choice to make. Minor adjustments gives the shotgun a faster fire rate and makes it now fire full auto. Turret Whip allows the Engineer to manually fire a powerful shot from the sentry. If a single pellet from a shotgun with this upgrade hits the sentry gun, it will cause it to consume 5 ammo from its reserves to fire a fast-moving shot in the direction it's currently facing. Basically, you can use this thing to have your turret fire a powerful shot on demand just by shooting it. I'm going to be honest and say that I was really sleeping on this upgrade and did not know the full extent of this thing's power. The turret whip is probably the clear choice to make here, as it can significantly increase your damage output, especially with your sentries. In terms of strong overclocks, the one that probably makes the Warthog the strongest has to be the Cycle Overload. It gives the Warthog more damage and a faster fire rate while increasing reload time and giving it a wider spread, which arguably could be seen as a good thing because it just means you can hit more things with your shots. Simply put, it's a lot to gain for very little loss. All this equates to the Warthog being a generally useful weapon no matter what kind of build you're running. The stubby SMG is admittedly the primary I like the least with the Engineer. It's not that I think it's bad, I just for some reason have a problem with calling a weapon that you hold with one hand a primary weapon. It just feels weird, you know, maybe I'm in the minority here. But in any event, this weapon is, as I said, very useful and interesting. Every shot has a 25% chance to electrocute the target on hit, damaging them over time while also slowing their movement. The stubby can basically be upgraded one of two ways: the route of electrifying everything, or the route of being a bullet hose. In the first tier, you have the options of either increased direct damage, a higher chance to electrocute with each shot, or increased overall ammo capacity. Personally, I would go for either increased ammo or a higher shock chance, but really any option here is fine. In tier 2, you can have either a bigger magazine size, less recoil, or a faster rate of fire. Here I would go with the better recoil because this thing can kick a little bit, and the mag size and rate of fire are already pretty good as is. In tier 3, the choice is between increased direct damage or increased overall ammo. Here you can honestly choose either or, but for me, I like more bullets to kill things with, so that's what I chose. In the 4th tier, your choice is either increased weak point damage or increased damage to electrified targets. For me, I like to go with the more damage to shocked enemies simply because I like to go for the electrify route, but if you want to go for the bullet hose route, you certainly can. Finally, in tier 5, you can choose to either simply have a larger magazine size or give you a chance to cause an AoE lightning attack each time you hit an enemy. This is the one I would go for regardless of what route you are going because it's just so good at causing huge area damage, it's hard to justify not using it. For overclocks, the stubby has two very powerful options. The turret arc allows you to fire at your turret to cause a small burst of shock and then create an electrical arc to any other turret within 15 meters. This is really effective if running the Gemini upgrade for the sentry since you have 2 sentries that you can arc between. Just be careful you don't hit your allies with this one. Finally, the turret EM discharge allows you to trigger a huge electrical explosion around the sentry whenever you hit it with an electrified shock. Either way, you will be shocking a lot of enemies a lot of the time. The Lock 1 Smart Rifle, or the Loki Rifle as I like to call it, is certainly the most interesting primary weapon in the Engineer's arsenal. It has a lot of intricacies with its lock-on system and can be hard to use at first, but thankfully it has access to many upgrades to help with its ease of use. In the first tier, you can have either increased damage or extra ammo. Either one would work here, but I personally like having more damage. In tier 2, you get either higher lock-on range at a tighter field, more efficient lock-loss threshold, or increased overall lock-on range. Here, you kinda need to learn what parts of the smart rifle you struggle with the most, but for me, I like a tighter spread for more focusing. In tier 3, you can have either bonus damage to electrified or burning targets, increased penetration, or something called smart targeting, which basically means the gun will prioritize low health enemies before healthier ones. Here, I would go for the penetration because this gun does not have a lot of ammo to begin with and you want to make the most out of each shot. In tier 4, you get either decreased lock-on time or an increased number of maximum locked targets. Personally, I would go for the quicker lock-on time for similar reasons as before. Having more targets may sound good, but it just means that you're going to burn through ammo a lot faster. Finally, in tier 5, you have effects that either apply a shock to the target when struck, emit a fear effect to nearby enemies when you finish a burst, or deal increased damage to enemies that are fully locked on. This is kind of a hard choice to make depending on what you are going for, but for me, I would go with the increased damage to a fully locked on target. The damage you get is very good and it allows you to make the most out of all of your shots. For overclocks, the one that has the most potential is probably the Executioner. It gives even more damage to fully locked on enemies at the cost of less ammo, making you even more deadly but even more tight on ammo. Simply put, the Smart Rifle excels at either controlling large groups of enemies or deleting larger, more elite threats. The Deep Core Grenade Launcher is another simple but elegant weapon. Specializing in breaking up big groups of enemies, the grenade launcher has many upgrades that give it a lot of punch. In the first tier, you have either increased damage radius, more ammo reserves, or increased area damage. Honestly, here any choice will do you good and you really can't go wrong with any of these choices. In Tier 2, you have either further increased ammo reserves or further increased area damage. Again, you can really do either one of these and be perfectly fine. Tier 3 gets a little more interesting with the choice of either increased armor breaking damage, increased projectile velocity, or converting half of your direct damage into heat damage for a burning effect. Here it kinda depends on what you are going for, but personally I like the velocity upgrade for more consistent shots. In Tier 4, you can have either increased damage radius, an increased chance to stun, or a randomized amount of damage that could be lower or higher than normal. Personally, I like to take the increased damage radius because the random damage numbers are putting a little too much of a luck factor into this weapon for me. Finally, the 5th tier lets you choose between either turning your grenades into proximity mines, giving them increased damage if they directly hit an enemy, or giving them the ability to transfer your current movement speed to their velocity. Here, I like to take the increased direct damage, and honestly, it's mainly because I don't want to do math in my head or try to work around the proximity mines. But hey, if you don't mind that, then I guess any of these upgrades would work fine for you. Finally, for overclocks, the grenade launcher has two really good options. Hyperpropellant is basically a combination of the spike grenade and high velocity upgrades, but turned up to 11. The damage radius is a lot smaller, but the direct damage it deals is insane. On the other hand, the Fat Boy basically turns this thing into a fat man from Fallout. The grenades become mini nukes that actually leave behind radiation fields where they land. The only problem is you can only bring a few of them, but then again, you'll only need a few. Side note, if you use the Fat Boy overclock, it makes the launcher great at breaking terrain, except you just can't walk into the terrain. Breach Cutter is one of the most versatile weapons in the game, with a lot of applications, and its upgrades can really help to elevate it further. In the first tier, you can have either increased projectile lifetime or increased magazine size. Here, I would personally go for the increased lifetime to effectively give the gun more range. In Tier 2, you have either more ammo reserves, a higher beam DPS, or a wider beam width. Here, it's kinda down to personal preference, but I tend to use either the increased ammo or increased DPS. In the third tier, you can choose between either reduced delay on the beam's expansion or reduced reload time. Here, I would go with the reduced delay on the beam since it basically means the beams are ready faster and the increased reload doesn't really increase it by that much in my personal opinion. In Tier 4, you can have either increased damage against armor or increased stun chance and duration. Personally, I would go for the increased stun as this weapon already has pretty good armor shredding capabilities and being able to stun huge lines of enemies is very useful. Finally, in the last tier, you have the choice of either making your lines explode when they reach the end of their lines, causing your lines to leave behind a trail of energy that can damage enemies that touch it, or make it so that way you fire 3 lines at a time. Personally here, I would go with either the triple split line or the plasma trail because it gives you a better chance of damaging more enemies. For overclocks, you can either use return to sender to make the lines move back towards the gun after it goes out for even more area of effect, or you could use spinning death to turn the beam into a spinning saw of plasma. Just be aware with this one as you will have significantly less ammo. The Shard Diffractor is probably my favorite secondary the engineer has. The death beam is really powerful and can be used in a lot of situations. In terms of upgrades, there is a lot of potential for improvement. In the first tier, you can either have increased area damage, increased direct damage, or increased ammo reserves. Here you can't really go wrong with any of these options, but I personally like the increased direct damage for more overall effectiveness. In Tier 2, you can choose either increased weak point damage or a larger effect radius. Here, I like to go for the increased weak point damage, but you can really use either one. In Tier 3, you get either increased charge capacity or reduced charge time. Again, you can really go with either one here, but I personally like the shorter charge time. In the 4th tier, you have either a choice of increased armor breaking power or increased heat buildup when directly hitting the target. Here, I feel the heat buildup is more effective as you can set enemies on fire much more easily. The last tier gives you a choice between dealing extra damage to shocked enemies, refunding energy for each kill, or applying a slow to enemies on hit. Here you can go with either the bonus damage to shocked enemies or the energy refunding to give you as much damage as possible. For overclocks, there is one that gives this weapon a very interesting interaction. Plastcrete Catalyst allows you to fire the Shard Diffractor onto the platforms created by the platform gun to cause a big explosion, essentially turning your platform gun into another explosive launcher. This one seems like a lot of fun and I wish I had it because it could probably be really effective at clearing the swarms. So now that we've set up the weaponry for our engineer, we still need to do more setup. Outside of weapons, the engineer still has his support equipment that he uses to assist the teammates. For the case of which grenade you want to bring, that really depends on the mission type as well as what kind of setup you are running. The lure grenade and proximity mines are great for situations where you want to control or manipulate an area like an escort or refining mission, while the plasma bursters and swarm grenades are better for overall damage output like the elimination or sabotage missions. The platform gun can be used for a lot more than simply traversing uneven terrain or gaps. You can use it for filling gaps in the ceiling caused by pods coming down to cut off the enemy's advance. This can be useful on something like a hacking pod if you're doing any kind of industrial sabotage mission. You could also use it to save yourself or teammates from a large fall. As stated before, it can also be turned into a makeshift explosive launcher using the shard diffractor. You can use them effectively at setting up your sentry turrets. The platform gun also has an array of upgrades to choose from similar to the rest of the engineer's arsenal, but honestly the only one that's really required is the bug repellent additive, because it means the bugs won't want to stand on the platforms, meaning that if you cover a wide enough area, you essentially have a safe place from the bugs, although not completely safe. Make sure that you capitalize on the platforms as much as possible because the level of utility they have is nearly unmatched. Speaking of the sentry guns, they offer the engineer the most effective means at completing his primary goal of defending an area. Much like the rest of his kit, his sentries can be upgraded in many different ways. As I said in the first video, the first upgrade basically asks you if you want 2 sentry guns or 1 stronger one. This is really completely up to you based on whatever setup you want, and depending on what type of build you're running, either one of these choices are good. In Tier 2, you can choose more ammo, a shorter construction time, or faster reloads. Personally, I like the quicker construction, but more ammo is a good choice too. Tier 3 lets you choose between armor breaking, stun chance, or more ammo reserves. Here, I like to take armor breaking, but honestly, whichever you want is fine, and you will most likely adjust this depending on the mission. Finally, Tier 4 lets you choose between more damage with a narrower field of view, or more range and the ability to use the laser pointer to prioritize targets. Again, this one is kind of up to you, but I like more damage at the cost of view. Make sure that you are as proactive as possible when placing your turrets. Keep moving them to the most advantageous position in order to get the most out of them. If possible, try to keep them close together so you can easily reload both of them when needed.
To mates, to darkness, and to making it back alive.
So now that you know the real ins and outs of the engineer and his kit, it's time to put it all together. This is the part where you can take the knowledge that you've gathered here and use it to put something together that will turn your engineer into a mad bug-killing machine. You could put together the stubby SMG and the shard diffractor to make an electrification build, or you could do a smart rifle and grenade launcher build that destroys elite enemies. Whichever combination you try, there are certainly ways to make it as effective as possible. Remember that as an engineer, your main contribution is control and defense. Use your platforms to cut off routes the bugs can take to get to you and your allies, and use your mines, sentries, and other equipment to make the routes that you do leave for them a death trap. Use your weapons as efficiently as possible, whether it be eliminating large groups of enemies or singular elite threats. Remember these principles and the road to legendary will be achieved in no time. And at the end of the day, always remember that it doesn't really matter how you play the engineer so long as you're having fun. Well, that was a lot to get through, but hopefully now you have a much better understanding of the advanced setup of the engineer and how you can equip yourself so that you're ready for whatever the higher difficulties have to throw at you. So what do you guys think? Did I miss anything? I hope this answered a lot of the questions that people had, and I would love to hear your feedback. Remember that I'm just a humble ironbeard, so even I'm still learning things as I go. But if I did miss anything, or if you want me to go even deeper and do specific build guides, let me know down below. I'm always open to new ideas and I love hearing what you guys have to say. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video helpful. Please be sure to give it a like because it tells me which types of videos you guys want to see. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next Friday for another video.